Hi, Adrian. Thanks for joining. Hi, Guy.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good, really well. Thank you. Just waiting. Everyone's jumping in now. Hi, Lon. Welcome. Okay, I think I'll get everyone on mute just to start with. We'll give it a few more minutes. Hi, Edward. Thanks for joining.
Hello.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Well, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for joining. Hi, Scott.
Hi.
How are you, mate?
Good.
Good, good. Just going to pop everyone on mute. Or if you could mute yourselves.
Yep.
Hi, Lee. How you going?
Yeah, not bad, thank you.
Welcome from sunny Ballarat. It must be hot up there today.
About 30, I think, today, so quite nice.
Very nice.
Yes.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for joining.
G'day, how are you?
Really well, thanks. Hope everyone's got something yummy for lunch.
Long. I've got a meeting at 1 o'clock, so.
That's completely fine. We're recording, so I'll send it through afterwards.
Oh, that'd be excellent. Great, thank you.
No worries. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and I can have them answered for you at the end.
Yep, no problem.
Actually, Leanne, I might have to take off as well. If you're able to send the recording through, that'd probably work for me better. I can have a look at it tonight.
Yep. Absolutely, mate. I know you're busy. Thank you, Dave.
Or
just
need to eat.
Have us muted in the background. Yeah, I've got a spaghetti carbonara here and a coffee. So.
All right. Thank you very much for that.
That's all right. No worries. Hi, Wayne. Welcome. Hi, Jerome. How are you? I think you're traveling. So welcome and pop yourself on mute. We've got about 17 on the call at the moment. So I might... oh, hang on. We're still coming in. We've got Stephen here.
Sorry.
Hi, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you for that. All right, thanks. Bye.
I'll pop you on mute, Steve. There we go. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Leanne Taylor. I'm a sales executive at Murdoch Webster Technology Group. I've just come across from Telstra at the end of last year, for those of you who know me from there. Thanks for joining today. This is my Hear from an Expert series, which we do every month from February through to November. And we pick a different topic each month, and it's designed to educate and illuminate, I guess, on new technologies that are coming through and really what we're seeing in the market, and hopefully provide some insight and content that's useful for you and your business. And it's also giving you direct contact with some of the best brains of the business. So today we're hearing from Rapid7's Dave Coleman. I've had the absolute pleasure of working with David when we were at Telstra, creating the Telstra SOC. He's an absolute legend in the security space. He's come from customer land. He's been in local government. He's gone through with NTT, Telstra, and now with Rapid7. So I certainly rate Dave very highly, and he's a great guy outside of work. So certainly someone that you could call a friend in the business if you have any security questions. He's always happy to have a chat. So thank you, Dave, for your time today. Just a bit of housekeeping. We've got over 20 people on the call today. So if you could just keep yourself muted. Any questions, pop it in the chat, or just shout out if there's anything you can't hear or anything that you can't see. Just pop it in the chat and I'll keep an eye on that. You're also welcome to take yourself off mute. This is meant to be an interactive session as well. So if you do have any questions, feel free to interrupt and ask away. We will have some Q&A at the end, but obviously if you guys have to get on with business and need to jump off, that's fine as well. So I might hand over to you, Dave, and thank you again for your time. And this is a really good topic and looking forward to sharing your intel. And you're on mute.
It is a very timely topic. I think it is front of mind of many people, especially given people like the Prime Minister came out, it was only mid last year, saying, hey, we're under attack and there's a whole bunch of things, including vulnerability management, that need to be done. I guess we're going to cover a few things today. One, I have to say, who is Rapid7, because it is common in our region, being that Rapid7 is headquartered out of the US, that many people actually don't know what we do in region, and more importantly, why we're actually qualified to speak about vulnerability and risk management. So we'll run through a few examples there, a few things to take into consideration, as well as how we can help you achieve those various requirements. And then absolutely, as Leanne said, this is meant to be interactive. Throw some curly questions out there if you want. I like them. Selfishly for me, if I can't answer it right now, at least I'll know for next time somebody smart asks the question. I'll have the answer at my disposal. So yeah, please make it interactive. Now with that, who is Rapid7 and why are we qualified to speak on this topic? So Rapid7's actually been around since an organization since the year 2000. We started our life off as a vulnerability management tool, predominantly focused on risk-based vulnerability management rather than the traditional CVSS scoring version, recognizing that way back then, good hygiene around identified vulnerabilities was a very critical thing to have in your organization as an ongoing effort as part of a program of works rather than a snapshot point in time, because of the rapid rate of change, even back then, that vulnerabilities introduced. Just relying on a single test once in a year was just not going to cut it. And so over the years, we've developed into more and more cyber capabilities. We have an entire platform, which many of the components we'll run through today are really geared to around identifying different types of vulnerabilities, monitoring your environment for those exploitation of those threats, and then being able to respond to those kinds of things in a proactive manner. Also underpinned by a level of managed services, which also feed back into a lot of the technology sets that we have. We have been members of the Global Cyber Threat Alliance for many years. For those of you that don't know, that is a cyber cohort of 25 plus dedicated cybersecurity firms, all doing threat intelligence sharing in the background. We all recognize that we all have to work together in order to effectively thwart the people that are trying to do bad things. One of the best investments we made, I think it was around 2006, was actually to acquire Metasploit. So Metasploit is one of the most common penetration testing frameworks on the planet. It's used by hundreds of thousands of testers across multiple different tools. We have our own professional version of that tool. But the good thing about that is that the actual intelligence from the exploits that go and get developed inside that framework by that massive community, we actually get to ingest into our tools and use, which helps us infer additional intelligence. We also have global honeypot networks that we manage and maintain. They are polymorphic, so they are continually changing to make sure that people are not identifying and then bypassing those in the future. And we get great amounts of intelligence to actually see what's actively being exploited in the wild, any new techniques, any new and emerging vulnerabilities that might have just been reported, and any upticks in attacks on those, or none at all. All of that then gets fed back into things like our vulnerability management tool as well, to help you understand and prioritize what's important and what's not. Combined with what we call Project Sonar, which is our proactive, basically sweep of the internet and open ports and services that are responding, their versions and their susceptibility to being exploited in the first place. We also make that available back into our tool sets for our customers so that you don't have to do the heavy lifting. A great example there, we do DNS IPv for reverse lookups. and then correlate that back so you can actually just automatically enter a portion of your domain into our tool, our vulnerability management tool, and it will say, here's everything we discovered. And if somebody in your organization's onboarded a new service and hasn't told the team, you'll be proactively be able to see that and enter that into your vulnerability management framework seamlessly. We also do a large volume of threat hunting through our managed security services. We do managed detection and response services, and that provides us really great intel around, again, what's being exploited, how's it being exploited, and the emergence of things like 0 days. And we publish all of this research because we are an intelligence-led organization. Research is at the heart of what we do, and all of the information gets published into various types of reports. We do have Australian-specific ones, so we have an ASX Top 200 report, that was published a few years ago. There'll be an updated one published this year. Last year, we published our National Industry Cloud Exposure Report, NIST for short, which again is accumulation of all of that Sonar and honeypot data that we're seeing across different geographical regions, verticals, on-prem, cloud, and basically chopping and changing that data set to a really interesting degree. We were also one of the few cybersecurity firms globally to actually have been featured in a report that went to the president, the previous president of the United States, around how vulnerabilities and exploitations of vulnerabilities in cyber systems could impact the economy. The report is very big and very boring for the most part, but our section's obviously very good. But either way, we have that pedigree of really well recognized organizational entities and employees that are at the forefront of what we do, and they are recognized as such. But not just at that level, also at each of the products that we bring to market. So as I mentioned before, our Insight VM tool, which is our vulnerability management tool, it's been around for a really long time. We've been in the Forrester's leader wave for well over a decade for vulnerability and risk management. This year, not even this year anymore, last year, we were promoted into the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, the Leaders Quadrant for SIEMs globally, which was a great achievement. As well as being recognized as a leader for application security testing, dynamic application security testing specifically. Our SOAR tool, our Insight Connect product, was also recognized by Frost & Sullivan as one of the global SOAR tools of the year. And most recently, we were awarded by Forrester as a managed security service provider leader for the managed security services we provide across the portfolio of tools that we run. One of our recent acquisitions, more around cloud security posture management and identity governance, which is called DivvyCloud, was previously also awarded multiple industry awards around helping to secure cloud instances. So a really great broad portfolio, helping our customers tackle different aspects of their overall cybersecurity challenges. Hence, we believe we're really well placed to talk around cybersecurity and specifically vulnerabilities in modern day operating environments. I might just stop there and pause for a second. Any questions, thoughts, or comments so far?
Dave, I do. Sorry, you know me. I always have questions for you. A lot of the customers on the call that I've been speaking with are often talking about doing penetration testing, and I need to organise pen test and things like that. And obviously, pen test is just a moment in time. And, you know, you could do a change or a patch upgrade or something next week and something's open and you don't see it again for another 12 months. Can you maybe talk to how Rapid7's vulnerability management kind of closes that gap? And obviously pen testers are relevant for certain testing and applications, etc. But can you maybe talk about where, you know, this vulnerability assessment maybe would be a better option for some of those use cases?
So I think you've touched on an interesting point in our industry in general in terms of terminology. Being in this industry for a while now, I'm not going to mention how long, I've come across varying degrees of what somebody would actually call a penetration test. And so quite a few of those, which is quite disappointing to see, are actually just vulnerability assessments. There is no active exploitation techniques. There is no further lateral movement within environments. There's no social engineering aspects. It's literally somebody running a tool like ours across a data set and then presenting results, which is not a true penetration test. It's a vulnerability assessment versus the latter, which is then the further exploitation, and then really guiding you towards, here are some control gaps that you don't have in your environment. We were able to do X, Y, and Z as a result of exploiting said vulnerability or a credentials or a phishing campaign. Thus, here are the things that you need to do as a result. As a proper pen test, that's fantastic, but it is still, as you say, points in time, and they are still really important to help you govern and identify potential control gaps and weaknesses in your control sets to further mature your overall cybersecurity posture. More often than not, an initial vulnerability assessment is definitely a part of that. But the rapid rate of change with vulnerabilities these days, every Tuesday there's something new from Microsoft. Some of it's really critical, some of it's not. Adobe, Java, take your software of choice. Cisco had one recently. Your perimeter firewalls could. Citrix had a fantastic one last year. Remote code execution. It's like, wow, that one was pretty bad. So if you're having a test before that, then you're potentially running up to a year with some pretty severe gaping holes in your organization that could be deployed. The whole intent behind a well-governed vulnerability and risk management program is that you have that ongoing cadence of assessing, prioritizing, and then remediating or accepting risk or putting in place mitigating controls around those identified vulnerabilities, whether that be at a software layer or a configuration layer. Long-winded way of saying stuff. Did that answer your question?
Thank you, Dave. Continue.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you're all acutely aware, and maybe some of you are experiencing this today, and certainly as an impact of COVID. I gave a talk to a bunch of universities recently and looking at the vast amount of digital transformation they've had to undergo just as a result of COVID and remote working, and all of the changes that are happening at a societal level. That's accelerated digital transformation a lot for a lot of industries, but especially during COVID, at the expense of betting in security up front, and sort of understandably so. They were fighting to survive, but hopefully the opportunity is representing itself to start closing the gap and reintroducing good security, analysis of what's being done, and then some control sets which should go towards mitigating any identified issues as a result. But there's some pretty key challenges that are driving that, the digital transformation, and why it's hard for the traditional controls and methodology to be keeping up. One is definitely the promotion of the more agile DevOps-based culture, where the development team are spinning up and spinning down resources, whether that's on-prem or off-prem in cloud, at a much more rapid rate than they previously did. Some people will release 20 times a day, some a couple of times a week, some still monthly, some still quarterly. But either way, it's still a lot more frequent, and often security might not be involved, or especially where it's a cloud-based service, the control sets might not exist or have been replicated into those cloud technologies in the first place. Secondly is, as part of that agile and digital extension, the guys building the applications, the underlying infrastructure, are actually doing that in a basically code set. So they're actually writing the code to orchestrate the cloud-based platforms and the supporting infrastructure to go and spin up and spin down those instances. Again, often bypassing security as a result. And lastly, one of the primary two vectors continues to be targeted web applications for intrusions into organizations to both get in, get through, and get out in terms of data sets. So it's still a really big level of exposure and weakness. There's been some pretty interesting stats that have come out, and what's a good presentation without stats? They're always slightly different, but most of the people that I've talked to, these align at least somewhat, maybe not percentage-wise, but at least impact-wise with most people. A large volume of people basically are saying they are not well prepared effectively to deal with cyber risk. If you see that percentage, people, 16% say they are, a large proportion is not. A large proportion are basically putting that down to a lack of qualified people, a lack of integrated tools, a lack of defined processes and capabilities. So there's a large swathe of issues impacting people to be able to do effective investigation, response, etc. In terms of the reporting aspects, because we're still seeing that shift up in through the boardroom and the exco, coming to grips with what cybersecurity actually is, a lot of the traditional reports that used to go up and still do in many cases are still very technical in detail, and the executive teams just cannot make heads or tails of what you're actually trying to tell them. So making sure that we've got a way to more effectively communicate, hey, it's not just a problem, but here's what we've identified. Here's why it's an issue. Here's the potential impact and ramifications if we don't do something about it. So please make a decision. And the way we communicate that more succinctly is still really important. And then lastly, we continue to hear of a rising number of shortfalls of people that are available in our industry to be able to help with the operational governance, managed services, et cetera, around cybersecurity in the first place. What happens as a result of that, though, then all of those things combined, the digital transformation, the lack of resources, the lack of integrated tools, things like web breaches. If you look at the Verizon threat report from last year, phishing, primary vector, web application attacks, secondary vector, they are doubling and they will continue to do so as more and more digital transformations take place. Secondly, developers typically fall into one or two categories. One, they say, yeah, I understand the security, but I'm coding for functionality. I've got this stuff to release and it's more important than the stuff you keep telling me about. So I need to get it out the door. We'll do security later. Or two, let's say what? Like they don't understand the fundamentals of coding securely in the first place. Thus, they're quite happy to release insecure code features and functions out into the wild just because they don't know better. We're also seeing that people, as they always have, are trying to step around the inbuilt security teams there that can provide that governance function because they don't want to be slowed down from releasing things in the first place, which is also introducing additional risk into the organizations. And then we get to the more alarming stat, which is quite a lengthy period of time these days to remediate, whether that's mitigate or remediate identified vulnerabilities. Now, that's a pretty alarming stat, given a lot of these things can be exploited, even if they're in your organization, through further lateral movement. And so the focus on just saying, hey, it's only my perimeter Citrix device I need to care about is a bit of a misnomer these days, given that phishing can often then lead to internal exploitation of your internal vulnerabilities as well. Now, what some people might not consider a vulnerability, but still really is in terms of a configuration vulnerability, are things like misconfigurations. There's still a large swath of misconfigurations that are at the heart of a lot of data leaks that have happened over the last little while. Just as recently as mid last year for Australian-based people, a large swath of driver's licenses being published on the internet through a wrongly configured Amazon S3 bucket. So these kinds of things as a vulnerability are still really important to take into consideration as part of an overall modern vulnerability and risk management program. So what does that then look like in terms of the different types of things that we need to consider in a modern program to make sure that we've got adequate coverage? So effectively, we've got our traditional coverage, which is pretty much bread and butter for a lot of people. More and more organizations have introduced the traditional vulnerability management. They do run tools and scans, sort of weekly, monthly, quarterly within their internal estate, or at least a snapshot of their estate. It's pretty well understood, I want to say, most loosely speaking, for a lot of organizations as to how to run that section of the program. I've got Windows patches that come out every month from Microsoft. They get ranked, and then I need to engage an internal team to go and get them either remediated, or my internal security team can confirm that I have an internal compensating control like my perimeter firewall, et cetera, that has a signature to prevent that being exploited in the first place. But then if we're moving towards what most people have these days, which is that hybrid sort of scenario where they do have cloud services, be that in Azure, be that in AWS, Google Cloud, take your cloud of choice. They often don't have the same visibility into both the assets that are running, the configuration and the software deployed on those, things like the modern ecosystem of tooling, so things like your Kubernetes clusters, Docker containers that are running microservices, so non-traditional, hey, fat Windows clients, devices spinning up and spinning down very, very quickly, as well as the combined cloud configurations in and around those assets. Right? Have I exposed an S3 bucket to the internet? Do I have overly excessive permissions on a security group or a user identity that I'm not quite aware of that has now all of a sudden opened that entire internal ecosystem up to that identity? These are kinds of more complex issues that people are now starting to grapple with as a result of that move to that DevOps culture and embracing cloud more for cloud native workloads rather than traditional infrastructure as a service. And then we go up through the application tier. Not forgetting the application tier, because those other two tiers are often there to support the running of things like your web applications and their supporting APIs. Publishing web interfaces, mobile phone applications, etc., internal applications, feeding back into a database and making people more efficient, accessible to all in all locations, etc. So making sure that you've got good understanding of when those applications are spun up, what they're written in, and more importantly, how they can be exploited is a really, really important these days. If we think back to the top two vectors of exploitation, that should be considered as part of an overall program. The challenge here is more that a lot of customers are unfamiliar with the notion of DevOps, let alone secure DevOps or DevSecOps, whichever term you prefer. And also, the dev teams often don't have good processes embedded into what they do to perform assessments in the first place, both pre and post release. So if we think about what that new paradigm looks like, the traditional approach in the middle, as we're building a monolith application or as we're releasing massive changes to our internal organization, there's often controls in and around those major changes to say, I'm going to go through a change control process, I'm going to perform a risk assessment, and then I'm going to release. A part of that should hopefully be some sort of risk assessment and vulnerability assessment. But there's a big shift in certainly DevOps and DevSecOps to make sure that we're both embedding ourselves earlier in the development process, the shifting left, if you will, to make sure that as people are compiling in their dev, test, QA environments, that we're identifying issues that are being coded into the application layer or the presentation tier itself before it actually gets its way into production. And that can happen in quite a number of different ways: static code analysis, dynamic application security testing, software composition analysis. There's a slew of ways. But more recently, people have also been releasing the term which we call shifting right as well. So making sure that even post-deployment, that we're continuing to assess the application that has been deployed into production for previously unknown configuration or application coding issues that might now present themselves. That might be in a Java framework that wasn't previously exploitable, but it now is. It might be a new method of doing SQL injections that wasn't previously known, but now is, et cetera, et cetera. So making sure that through dev, through to release and post-release, we have a good defined approach for being able to test at all those different tiers of infrastructure through to the application tiers is really, really important. Now, pleasingly, industry itself has actually made the changes as well. For me, one of the most notable ones was actually NIST, being a great standards body, have actually introduced some additional security controls into their standards around runtime application security protection, so that you're actually monitoring at the web application tier, looking for anomalous, suspicious, malicious activity, automatically blocking, etc. So going a little bit past what a traditional WAF would have done. But embedding that as an actual control type is a great recognition of things like the web application exploitation that has been occurring, and making sure compensating controls are actually considered as part of a holistic program. So that brings us to Rapid7 and what we do here to assist the customers in those various attributes. Our bread and butter, as I mentioned before, our Insight VM product, our vulnerability management tool, which is a risk-based vulnerability management tool for those traditional infrastructure-based and some forms of cloud-based and modern operating system vulnerability assessments. Our Insight AppSec tool is the dynamic application security testing tool. Think of that as automated penetration testing against your application security tier. So we will perform things like cross-site scripting, SQL injection attempts, etc., against your compiled application. And included in that product suite is our own runtime application security protection tool, which we call T-Cell, which is designed to do the monitor and protect function at that web application layer. So that NIST control is satisfied by that. Our recent acquisition of DivvyCloud is purely focused around cloud security posture management. So examining the configuration, the controls, and the identities that exist within public clouds, multi-clouds, so AWS, Google, Azure, and setting a singular policy across all of those cloud platforms at human readable levels, rather than having to know each individual cloud and their subcomponent names to design a really complex policy. You just say all databases must be encrypted, go. And again, helping to then remediate any identified vulnerabilities at that set as well. Woo. Effectively, what we're trying to do is make sure that as you're starting, maturing, or really getting into high levels of maturity, we have different tools and techniques to help you both on-prem and modern cloud environments, as well as modern DevOps tools such as Kubernetes, etc., to perform all of those different kinds of assessments, and more importantly, help you stack rank, prioritize, and respond in a very efficient manner to those identified vulnerabilities. As we mentioned before, cross-platform, really important this day and age. I don't know of that many organizations that have gone single cloud when they have gone cloud. It is often multi-cloud. So having that visibility across all of the different types of estates, as well as your new remote workforce, is still really important. If your exco are continuing to work remotely as well, and they're running high levels of exploitable systems, and they all of a sudden get exploited, ransomware, or somebody gets onto their box and starts posing as them, that's probably a bigger problem. So having the ability to view their vulnerability posture real time, even when they're working remotely at home, or God forbid on a beach or at a winery, that's still really important. I've mentioned rate of change already. Those rapid release cycles do pose problems, especially when you're getting down to configuration changes at the code base level, and it's not just the application tier release now, but it's configuring rule set changes at perimeter firewalls in your cloud. That can pose a problem as well. So being able to analyze those systems near real time, also critically important. And then it's all well and good for you to have these great controls, but being able to report effectively back up to your stakeholders in your organization around risk metrics in a meaningful way is also very, very important to us, to help you to be able to have that meaningful conversation and get further buy-in so that you can get and broaden your influence and hope to further increase the overall cybersecurity maturity of your organization in general through identification of issues and then mapping out of additional controls, be that process or technology, to support your ongoing efforts. So what do? Risk-based vulnerability management and container assessments. So containers like Kubernetes, Docker for those modern web applications. Software composition analysis, dynamic application security testing for the software development lifecycle through our dynamic application security testing tool. Application security monitoring through our T-Cell application. That's that RASP tool I was mentioning earlier. Cloud security posture management through DivvyCloud for all of those configuration assessments at the cloud tier specifically, from both cloud-based configurations, identity and access management groups, mappings, configurations, fine-grained policy assessments of containerized services like Kubernetes, and identity entitlement reporting. All of these, or most of these, have flexible deployment options as well. We do come across organizations, especially the big spooky ones, that have a requirement to not have their information in cloud. They want everything on-prem. So a lot of these have those options to be pure on-prem, as well as our SaaS-based services, which is really what the platform is geared to be. In saying that, our SaaS-based service is hosted for our region in Australia. Data is not replicated out of region. So for those entities that are comfortable with data being resided in the cloud, but still have data sovereignty concerns, that part's not a problem for us. Another important part and aspect of our overall approach is not just giving you tools as security operations teams and governance teams, but actually making it easy for you to provide the tool sets, the interfaces, and embed into workflows into the other teams like your DevOps teams or your infrastructure teams. Basically empowering them to run their own checks, embed into their own release pipelines, so that you're becoming more of a governance layer and oversight. And hey, have you noticed X, Y, and Z and provide remediation recommendations rather than the guy with the big chunky report and the big stick every single time. Thus, when you get the buy-in of those teams and it just becomes part and parcel of their, it's a standard working practice. The overall impact you'll have in increasing your cyber relationships as well as maturity will just compound. And lastly, but not least, integrations into a lot of the tooling that those teams use is also very important to drive that. So integration into their release pipelines like the CI/CD tooling, Jenkins, etc., as well as things like ServiceNow, Jira, ticketing integrations, so that very succinct information can be raised into those teams using the same methods that they would use day in and day out. Again, trying not to enforce security's little, hey, we need you to do it this way because we can't integrate into our holistic governance approach is just not a good way to get by. So we focus a lot on that.
Dave,
okay.
can I interrupt?
Questions?
I have a quick question, Dave. Is that all right?
Excellent.
Jumping
yes,
in.
That was a good time to stop.
Take a breath. It's all good. There's a question around, is there an automated way to deal with IOCs, so indicators of compromise?
Yeah, so for us, that's different. So an IOC is observing something in your environment that looks like it's either exploiting something like a vulnerability or using techniques like living off the land. I'm executing some really weird and suspicious PowerShell across my organization. I'm running some scripts. I've inserted a batch file. My registry just changed. There's a variety of different techniques that don't actively exploit vulnerabilities themselves. And so, yeah, the IOC bit for us comes through one of our other parts of our wheelhouse. If you think back to that flywheel, one of those elements for us is what we call Insight IDR, which is our incident detection and response tool, which is very much designed to take in, like a traditional SIEM would, multiple different log feeds, but also includes in it things like an EDR agent to look at all the endpoint telemetry, endpoint security logs, looking at process spawns, and what's happening around that. And through our own threat intelligence team, the Threat Intelligence Alliance data that I mentioned earlier, and our managed detection and response teams doing their own proactive threat hunts, looking for emerging tactics and techniques, using things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework is a great tactics and techniques body of knowledge. Embedding that into the detection capabilities of Insight IDR is how we would address that. Answer the question?
Getting myself off mute. I'm thinking yes. Steve, if you want to confirm that your question has been answered.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the various application layers, and I do mean everything that helps to present the application. So through traditional foundational infrastructure, networking, firewalls, up through the application tier itself. Effectively, what we want to go through is the process of testing, monitoring for interesting items, and then preventing those in the first place, or if found, reverting. So how can we help you along that journey? In terms of testing, we've got a variety of different ways that we do that. And importantly there, making sure that we're helping your operational teams be as efficient as possible through the use of things like automation is really important to us. Again, there's no use you having to have an army of people having to run all these tools because you're actually being detracted from more important work, shall we say, more meaningful work that you could be doing in your organization rather than running the tools. So simple things like being able to automatically discover assets within your environment, whether that be on-prem, whether it's assets in your cloud, whether it's new web applications that have been spun up that you don't know about. Having those kinds of features and functions, really important. But also then automating the testing processes to react. So, if there is a high risk vulnerability that comes out overnight, it's a 10. It's for any public facing application. I'll pick on Bluekeep this week. Why not? It's still relatively new. So that was the really great Microsoft RDP vulnerability that pretty much anybody on the planet could exploit if you had a public facing RDP service. So in the event that that came out, there could have been a significant lag time between when you woke up the next morning and hopefully got a notification and responded to it, but maybe you didn't, and maybe you were just relying on your monthly scan. So that could have been a pretty big lag time for you to then go and find out that, oh crap, that was a really, now I need to go back through a month of data and see whether we've been exploited or not. Making sure that you can react to that kind of stuff, saying, yep, I have a baseline. If anything of a CVSS score of 7 or more comes out, automatically go and scan my infrastructure and then tell me if anything there is vulnerable to that new exploit. Those kinds of things can make your operational team's lives much, much easier. Likewise, where you can embed things like application security assessments into the features and tools that your DevOps teams use when they're compiling and releasing their applications using things like Jenkins for orchestration. Insert a step for test application components. Fail if high-risk application exploits are found, and tell the team. Automate that kind of stuff as well, so that you're not doing the rudimentary things and alleviating your teams to do the good 101 stuff, but make sure it's tested in the first place. Reporting back in meaningful ways is really, really important. As we mentioned before, it's no good saying I've got CVSS scores of 10 everywhere. It's like, well, what the hell does that mean? It's, again, not really very beneficial to people to understand that. And then having meaningful information can then help you and your internal teams who are responsible for the systems or applications that they run or build make meaningful decisions around whether they will or will not go and either put in a mitigating control or go and remediate via a patch or an application release or a configuration change. Inside VM for us, our vulnerability management tool absolutely helps meet those requirements. We are absolutely designed to collect data across those various platforms, on-prem, bread and butter, remote assets like your Exco working at the vineyard, through our agent, which is connected to the cloud for pretty much real-time assessments. We have API integrations into cloud services, so we can do asset synchronization into AWS and Azure, for example. So as those teams are spinning up new assets, we'll automatically see that through the API and inject that into the dashboards information function. And depending on how you've embedded it, you might also be able to enforce a scan straight away so that you're not accidentally introducing some vulnerable systems into production. Prioritization is part and parcel of what we do there. We use a risk-based approach in Insight VM for prioritization. Each vulnerability itself is ranked between 0 to 1,000. And then a compilation of those, accumulation of those vulnerabilities per asset gives you a really good risk-based view of all the vulnerabilities, thus the heat map of those vulnerable assets within your organization is also influenced by defined asset criticality. So if you've got a platinum service sitting in the data center that has a medium risk vulnerability, but a plastic-based server sitting behind a firewall over there, and it's got a high risk vulnerability on it, you want to be able to basically modify those values, because actually, in reality, the risk to that platinum service is of much greater concern versus the plastic thingy recorder that can be torn down, and it also has other compensating controls in and around it. So we use those different techniques to help organizations actually prioritize by risk what they need to then go and remediate. And then the remediation function, we can embed ourselves into different tools to help with that process, either in a manual or automated way, but I'll go through that a little bit later. AppSec, same thing. We have APIs there that are used to onboard new applications quite easily. Our project sonar can be used to identify new URLs that are spun up associated to your organization, which you can then onboard into Insight AppSec. And more importantly, because this is cloud-based, we do have role-based access control, which we find customers gaining the best value when they onboard their DevOps team to look at the applications that they're compiling and the resultant set. Have a look at all of the tests that we've run, the evidence that we're presenting to them to say, here is why it's an issue, and here it's why it's high risk, and here's how you should go about remediating it. Gets really great buy-in and provides great bang for buck because that team then feels empowered and no longer like security are the gateholders. Same process used to prioritize because of our knowledge of the attacker mindset, things like the Metasploit, how easy it is to perform exploits in the first place. We can then basically infer it's a really high risk vulnerability for your application because of X. So if nothing else, go focus on these 10 high risk applications in these different elements of your overall application. Take this chance to re-highlight the fact that our application security testing tool itself has been ranked 3 years in a row by Gartner as being one of the best in class for dynamic application security testing, predominantly due to the fact that we have a really good internal, what we call universal translator engine. Think of it like the universal translator for Star Trek. We have really good knowledge of all the different programming languages that are used in modern application development and how they work and how they can be exploited, and to fingerprint those. So as a result, we know it's built in Angular and we know how to attack Angular really, really well. And so it helps us provide a really good level of limited false positives as a result. Good. Divi Cloud for us is really important to round out that cloud piece for making sure that we're actually assessing not just infrastructure as a service type infrastructure that exists there, but broadening that out into things like the misconfigurations. I don't have policy compliance for these types of systems or services. I'll use that database encryption thing again. If it's tagged as a high risk database or the information that it is, it has to be encrypted with a key management service. I can never have open S3 buckets to the world. It always must be via controlled ACLs. Those types of things, Divi Cloud really helps us in that kind of realm, as well as assessing things like Kubernetes and Docker containers for adherence to good policy configuration standards as well. But on the flip side of that is also things like our AWS permission sets. I alluded to this before. They can be complex and they can be dangerous. And we've seen many resulting things here where people have not understood the various different ways you can tie permission sets together and the way permissions flow through all of that as an end result. And as a result, wrong entities have ended up with complete access to systems that they otherwise should never have been able to see. So being able to surface identity entitlements there to reduce the identity misconfiguration type vulnerabilities is also really a strong foundational component of what Divi Cloud provides for us. Questions, thoughts, comments on any of the ways we can help you test? Sure. And just to reiterate the fact, a good and maturing vulnerability and risk management program would have this happening frequently. You do not want to be waiting a quarter or a year, God heaven forbid, a year to understand that you have exploitable risks in your organization. You want to know that pretty close to the fact and then put in, as a baseline, at least get the exploitable ones out of the way and then work on the things that are theoretical, but maybe not weaponized in the environment as an approach. Now, moving along to monitoring if exploitations might be occurring. How do you see if a vulnerability might be being exploited in the wild? How do you use that to help infer risk in your vulnerability and risk management program on-prem? How do you monitor your application tier? How do you monitor your cloud tier for any changes that might expose your organization to further risk? How do you definitely at the web application tier identify and block those suspicious or malicious actors or just suspicious behaviors from exploiting that web app tier in the first place? Change. Aha, sure. So back to the intro. Rapid7's been doing this for a while. We have our own threat team. We have our own global honeypot network. We actually actively see where exploits are being attempted in the wild or new things that we've never seen before. We contribute to things like MITRE attack. We contribute new vulnerabilities that we discover as a research organization as well. All of that information makes its way back into things like Insight VM as a threat feed. We have a very specific dashboard in the tool that is basically our threat feed dashboard, which tells you all around exploitable vulnerabilities that have been identified in your organization. Again, helps you to further prioritize what you should be both analyzing, mitigating, or remediating within your environment. Again, that risk scoring matrix is used there. One of the dashboards, which is always interesting when we first go into an organization that doesn't have a program in place, is the exploitable vulnerabilities by release date and the risk ranking around that. And it can sometimes be confrontational, knowing and just seeing the metrics in and around that when you don't have that kind of program in place. The other one that's
Dave,
always very interesting.
Sorry, Dave, I'm asking a question. With the recent SolarWinds breach, I guess you could call it, so can you maybe touch on how Rapid7 detected that or what that would have looked like through Insight VM?
Two different parts. So all of our customers got a proactive notification around our own deconstruction of the SolarWinds. Well, I'm going to call it the SolarWinds exploit anymore. They've got a very bad name as a result, Orion. But effectively for our managed detection and response and our SIEM customers, they got a proactive notification into the platform. Our MDR service guys basically ran retrospective analysis across the data sets of everything we ingested, because the indicators of compromise had all of the IP addresses of the command and control infrastructure. They had URLs that people were visiting as part of that. So they could quite easily search for retrospective activity against the threat actors themselves. And then once it was recognized, hey, here was the group of software components that were used to orchestrate this in the first place, then we had a very succinct detection that was released inside the platform, so people could basically either run a manual assessment against their environment for that vulnerability, or if they were using our Insight agents, they would have had that live available for them as a dashboard saying, here's a dashboard just for this, and here is what is not exploited, but is basically compromisable, exploitable within your environment. So please go fix it now. Answered?
Trying to get off mute. Sorry. Yes, thank you.
You should just stay off mute. You know you're going to ask more and more questions. The other one that we find is always very interesting for people, especially when they're trying to get buy-in from the wider business, is where we had this exploitable vulnerability by skill level. So not only is it exploitable, but we know through things like our Metasploit executions how easy or difficult it is to perform the exploit in the first place. You know, can a novice script kiddie get this done, a novice, or does it take like a really advanced actor to get this done? Again, you can help that infer. If it's a nation state, the likelihood might be that you're targeted depending on your industry or not. And you can, through your risk evaluation process, or if you're doing, threat mapping, make that assessment by yourself. But either way, this is often something that is of great value when you're trying to communicate to your wider stakeholder group. We're exploitable, and script kiddies can do it, and we've got 1,500 assets that are exploitable to this. can we please make a move on getting this as part of a regular cadence, establish some SLAs for patching in our organization, as an example. The other good thing about Inside
patching's
VM,
an interesting one. Sorry, Dave, chiming in again. Patching's an interesting one, and it's a conversation a lot of customers, that we have with a lot of customers. Just it's such a big beast. Any
it
tips?
can be, and getting the approach there, we're going to come to patching and how we can sort of help there as a separate bit of this. So maybe we'll park it to then. Reminds me.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of organizations still struggle with getting the wider buy-ins. Like, I'm not touching that server over there, or it's going into the backlog. I've got these 1,500 other things to do that are more important. Sorry, you'll just have to wait. Yeah, we'll touch on it. It's a big topic. AppSec for us, understanding how things can be attacked is obviously really, really important. OWASP is a really great framework that is developed and continually updated every couple of years. Actually, we're expecting one this year, we hope. People that are experts in application security and have been involved in incident response processes, for example, basically compiling a list of common exploit vectors within the application surface layers, and basically writing and stack ranking all of the different types so that you actually know, hey, look, here are the top 10 things that are always exploited, and they're easy or somewhat difficult to do or not. But making sure that at least those are embedded into the DevOps team's psyche to say, make sure you're coding against this stuff because this stuff's bad, is really important as a foundation. But then, it's a very long list. It's not just the OWASP top 10, and there's also emerging tactics and techniques. So Inside AppSec for us, really capable tool of performing automated assessments against the application layer. We've had some great success with some customers basically augmenting what they had ongoing penetration tests, which they couldn't afford to do given the rate of change that's coming out. This particular firm was a security governance firm. So if they were breached, their reputation goes out the window, and so does their business. So they took it really seriously. But their release cycle was like, yep, we've moved to daily releases. They're like, we can't pen test daily. Like, it's just, we can't do it. Even monthly is a stretch with the budget we've got. So this was a really good way for them to sort of blend both worlds, to go, you know what, we'll take the 80-20 rule. We'll use this tool as an automated assessment against the application tier. Embed this into the DevOps guys so they can view the results themselves. Embed this into the vulnerability risk management program to track remediation efforts, and stack rank by risk what needs to be remediated, and then track that it's done. And then still do ad hoc pen tests, because no tool is ever going to replace a really smart human that can then perform the really meaty types of chaining of events versus the more automated process, because you'll still need both. No tool is ever going to replace a really smart human. But effectively, they were able to get this in by a reduction in the budget they were already had for executing pen tests or regular pen tests in the first place. So they're still doing one annually, but they're now doing this frequently. I mentioned earlier, we have a product called T-Cell, which is our runtime application security protection tool. So for those of you that have been around for a while and have had the glory of having to deal with a web application firewall, it's a bit different than that, in that this is actually embedded into code. It's an agent that sits on the box, and it is called as part of the application calls to things like databases. So it's got real granular views of what's happening at that application to database tier, rather than just the front-facing web tier, and then it sort of loses all visibility after that. It also doesn't rely on you having to set very granular policy rules, which we all loved with WAFs. Not. So looking at things like tactics and techniques, I hate the word machine learning these days, but using behavioral statistics to see when anomalies might be occurring within the environment, giving you the flexibility to both just report on or block attempts at pretty much every tier, every URL, every call action that you might have within the application itself. from a variety of different attack types, whether they're SQL injection, cross-site server scripting, cross-site server forgery, this goes on. So this can help with the monitor and protect function as well. And then we come into the, hey, visibility and compliance. What does this mean for you? When we're talking about cloud, how do you have a good handle on whether your cloud configurations align to your defined organizational policy? I'm pretty sure most of you will have an internal IT policy that governs the use of resources, what you can and cannot do with them. Right? Never write out any rule to any system. Pretty basic. But do you have that same policy and visibility across your cloud estate? Many people do not. And so this is really where DivvyCloud can help to monitor that governance layer through its integration into all the cloud APIs, its constant checks for changes, its large database of inbuilt checks that align to industry standards. So if you align to ISO as an organizational framework, we can assess your instance against ISO, PCI, HIPAA doesn't matter in Australia, but take a framework or build your own. DivvyCloud is more than capable to make sure that you can enforce your policy visibility and standards across those different frameworks. Importantly, I mentioned infrastructure as code before. It is a scary area that is growing as more and more people are diving deep into their digital transformation and really trying to leverage all the goodness of cloud native controls. And I don't mean SaaS, I do mean infrastructure as code, running serverless compute. You don't have an underlying server running a task. It is all done at the cloud application layer instead. And so making sure that as people are compiling that code set, we can analyze that code set against your compliance standards as well, so that they don't inadvertently write again, identity access management rule or network security group or ACL rule into the IAC rule set and go, whoops, sorry, I accidentally opened it up to the world, my bad. Make sure it doesn't happen in the first place by examining the code set. And again, giving that to the development team embedded in their tool set to make sure that they can basically receive the results real time and fail on a defined organizational standard based on risk. Same thing for identities. I won't go through it again, but overly permissive things, this becomes scarier and scarier. Again, the more that we delve into the digital transformation, those cloud native aspects, and the more, I don't want to besmirch the industry, but the more that people are coming up to speed with how to build on native cloud platforms, as opposed to how they would have built traditionally, is also driving some of the issues that we're seeing here, because a lot of them still don't understand the intricacies and the interdependencies of the various modules that make up the identity and access management features within cloud. And we move to prevention. It's all good that we can test for these things and please monitor or prevent where possible, but if we actually find something that is of a significant nature, what can we do that is not complete knee-jerk reactions and can also alleviate the operational burden of your internal teams? So automation, it's a big thing in the industry right now. We have an automation tool. We use elements of that automation tool in each of our other product portfolios. So our SOAR tool, which we call Insight Connect, it won that Frost & Sullivan Award I mentioned earlier. We've lifted some discrete workflows from it and embedded them into our vulnerability management tool based on some early customer feedback that basically said, hey, if you could let us do these kinds of things, it'd help us massively. And so simple things like, if we find, I'll take that Bluekeep example again. If we find Bluekeep and it is a system that is publicly facing, go and make a pan firewall rule to block that right now. Automate it. We don't care. It is too high risk. And you don't have to then go and engage the teams to get it done and wait for their SLAs to come through. Likewise, if it's an internal asset and it's, again, a really high risk vulnerability, maybe you can automate something like Cisco ICE to quarantine that asset from the network so that it can't be exploited, and then further enable somebody to move laterally across your network while you go remediate it. So embedding some of those remediation type workflows at your internal infrastructure tier, as well as within your cloud tier. Making sure that if somebody has managed to perform a configuration function, it's not being embedded into the CI/CD pipeline, but they've gone in and manually made some changes that don't align to your policies. Change them back automatically. That is too high risk. You should not be able to do that in the first place, and you have, away we go. Now, obviously, ranking things based on priority, we've talked about it at this point in time, and protecting those web apps from things like the OWASP top 10 through things like T-cell. Oh, I've mentioned a couple of things already around some of the automation workflows that are available from Insight VM as response actions. Now, these can be invoked manually or automatically defined on workflows. And if you want to get really funky and extend this, we have a license uplift option available to just license our SOAR platform. And you can start doing some of this from things like your chat ops tools. So if you're running Microsoft Teams or Slacks and you're in an unauthorized group, and you get a notification that high risk vulnerability is being observed inside your DMZ. Let's take Bluekeep again. Slack, quarantine asset, go. Done. Invoke it from Slack. You can also pull back information from your internal ops team. So if they've seen an indicator of compromise that you mentioned earlier, tell me about the high risk vulnerabilities on this asset. Oh, look, there's 15. Oh, that one's important. Okay, quarantine. There's a whole bunch of ways you can move into extending and automating a lot of the mitigations around identified vulnerabilities. Remediation projects are also a really great way. A lot of people are starting to, again, gain further organizational buy-ins effectively from the teams that have to go and execute the remediation tasks in the first place. More often than not, IT are there as that governance and reporting layer. They do give the different teams, the networking team are responsible for switching, routing, firewalls, probably server infrastructure. Maybe you might have a separate server team. It might be a separate server team for Windows versus Nix boxes. Being able to succinctly tell each individual group, here is your discrete program of works that you need to go and do this month. Here are the 15 different solutions you need to deploy against these 45 different assets. There you go. Run away and do them, and have the results automatically communicated back to you and the stakeholders is really quite powerful. Again, it helps them become more self-sufficient, more self-reliant. And the organizations we've seen great success in this is not only where there are defined organizational SLAs, but where the organizations are getting smart around, gamification of this. Each individual team are basically trying to race to be the best in terms of their stats of remediation. It's quite good. Somebody is...
Dave, sorry, just to jump in, mate. Sorry, just to jump in. We've gone a little bit over, so if anyone does need to jump off, just pop in the chat and say farewell. But is there how much have we got to go, just to give people an expectation?
All right. Bugger all. Effectively.
Q&A next.
Yeah, effectively, that's it.
Excellent.
AppSec, it has some really great functions that the DevOps teams find really valuable when they're coding for changes, and making sure that they are able to, on the fly, replay any of the code changes to make sure that the code changes they've made are mitigating the vulnerabilities. I won't go over T-cell again. Runtime application protection with very fine-grained policies, self-sufficient. And then DivvyCloud for that cloud level. I mentioned before, rolling back things like ACL changes and firewall changes. DivvyCloud absolutely has configurable bots that you can do down to a finite level upon any resource or resource type, to both not just report on, but also go and remediate identified issues that are either configurations or other. That was pretty much it. Other than, hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully that allows you to, well, they're not meant to be showing. Hopefully that allows you to start to understand how you could potentially start closing some of those modern vulnerability gaps that may exist in your ecosystem and ways to go about it.
Now, does anyone have any questions? I've I've just put a note in the chat to say, please come off mute. Now is your time, or forever hold your peace. It's good to pick Dave Coleman's brain while we have him. No question's a silly question. Anyone? Nope. Okay, that's good. You must have covered everything, Dave. Just to kind of round things off, what Murdoch Webster's doing with Rapid7 is some vulnerability assessments. So I'll send an email out after the session today and give you a bit of an idea of what that is. But it's really a great way for you to trial what the agent is. It's very lightweight. I don't know, Dave, did you cover off that? I'm not sure if we talked about it. It's very lightweight agents. It's very easy to deploy. Doesn't affect production. It's super easy. We deployed one for one of our customers earlier in the week, and they were getting immediate information and feedback, which was very helpful for them. So it's a really quick and easy assessment that we can do. If you like it, you can keep it, and then it's just a licensing structure from Rapid7. If you don't like it, the trial ends, we turn it off, and the agent gets pulled back. So it's really light touch, which is one of the really awesome things about this. And it's really easy to consume the extra layers of the platform with Rapid7 once you've got that agent deployed. So if you are interested in knowing a bit more, let us know. And also we're hosting now that post-COVID, we can actually meet in person, which is very exciting. On the 25th of February, we're holding a internet lunch and learn with the guys from Rapid7, where Dave will go into a bit more deeper tech around the whole platform. That's on Thursday, the 25th of February, and it's available for 10 customers. So if you are interested in getting a seat at that table, please let us know. It'll be a fancy pants lunch, I think. So it'll be lovely, and it's a really great way to sort of get one-on-one and deep down and personal in the tech with these guys, and really hope you get some value out of that as well. So as with anything, I take all your feedback quite seriously. So good, bad, the difference. If you've got any comments, I'd love to hear it on email. We'll have some new topics coming out for next month. But yeah, hopefully these are relevant and good for your business. So thank you for joining, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks, guys.